Welcome back everyone to Gacha Interact. Today we're going to be taking a look at the second half of the 1.1 Wuthering Waves banner today. This character we're looking at in this video is Changli. Let's go through this banner and see whether or not Changli is a good pulling option for you. And if you do enjoy the video, go ahead and leave a like and subscribe and check out the rest of the channel for other videos you may be interested in. We do also have a Discord you can join where a lot of our members talk with each other and we have a lot of fun in there. Now, on to the video.
Now, normally in these to pull not to pulls, we usually talk about the character first, but because we made a pretty recent video talking about Changli and her pre-release, if you guys want to go ahead and actually learn more about her kit and her character, you guys can go over there and watch that video as well. So we'll jump right ahead into looking at the weapon banner. Looking at the weapon banner and the weapon we have, it is Blazing Brilliance, which is going to be Changli's weapon. Now, it does have a main stat of crit damage, which makes sense, obviously, considering she is going to be helping a lot more with crit rate and whatnot. So a lot of her, stats and whatnot are going to be helping with crit rate. It makes sense that her weapon's going to be crit damage. Looking at the ability on the weapon, it states that attack is increased by 12%, and the equipper gains 1 stack of Searing Feather upon dealing damage, which can be triggered once every 0.5 seconds, and gains 5 stacks of the same effect upon casting the Resonance skill. Each stack of Searing Feather gives 4% additional Resonance skill damage bonus for up to 14 stacks. All stacks will be removed within 10 seconds after reaching the new max stack. Looking in general at this weapon, it seems obviously like a great weapon. Obviously, it's going to be Changli's personal weapon, so if you're going for Changli, this is going to be highly sought after. And there are some other weapons if you're looking for Changli and who you could actually use them for. Once again, that's going to be kind of different, but in terms of what this weapon could be, honestly, any sword user could really use this weapon. It's going to have a higher amount of crit damage, and it's nice to give that attack percent. And although it's a nice stat stick for the attack percent as well as the crit damage for characters that are just trying to have a higher damage ceiling, it is going to be tied very much to actually trying to get those stacks of your resonance skill damage. So if you are finding a character that's actually going to be using the resonance skill damage consistently, that's probably going to be best for you. There are some other characters that use it, but personally, in my personal opinion, really with a lot of these games, and first and foremost, what you're trying to do, until you get to, games like Genshin, whatever, that have had so many characters, it kind of defeats the purpose to really go after a 5-star weapon while not going for the 5-star character itself. So in my personal opinion, while you're going for Blazing Brilliance, you should have Changli first, and that should be kind of what you're looking for first and foremost, just because there's not too many characters that this is really going to line up with when looking at certain characters. There are other characters that technically, like I said before, could technically use this weapon. Characters like Rover, whether it's the Havoc or the Spectro version. There are other characters that could actually just use the weapon, Yang Yang and Sanhua. These characters could use the weapon, and like I said before, more or less it's going to be more of a stat stick for them. The Rover usually depends more on the ultimate, and then also kind of switching out with other characters. Yang Yang's a similar way, and Sanhua as well. So a lot of these characters are just not going to be really using this weapon to its fullest extent, whereas, some other, obviously Changli, it's her personal weapon, it's going to be used the most. So if my personal opinion, if you're not going for Changli, then I would just say to skip the weapon altogether as well.
Guys, with Natlin coming up sooner than you might expect, I have one question for you. How are your savings looking? Lubar is a service that allows you to top up on Genesis crystals for a cheaper price so you can get that last minute grab of that character you've had your eyes set on. It's super easy and 100% safe because Lubar only needs your UID. No emails, no passwords. Many people have left positive reviews, and Lubar offers 24/7 live support in case you need help with any purchase. You can also top up your Star Rail account in the same way. After making a purchase, Lubar promises delivery in 30 minutes, but I got my Genesis crystals in just about 5 minutes. They have also proven themselves trustworthy through other creators like Dukaja, Jello Impact, Supera Tom, Mujin, and Tevat Times. So what are you waiting for? Use the link we have put in the description to top up today, and also thanks to Lubar for sponsoring the video. Now, back to the content. Now let's go into the summary of the video and kind of talk about all these questions that we're going to ask. The first one being, do you need Changli on your account? Basically, how valuable will she be for you? Another way you could ask this question is kind of like, what roles does your account have, or what roles do you need, or who else maybe already fills that? And with Wuthering Waves being in still kind of the early stages, I mean, we're still in 1.1, 1.2 is coming up next. So the game, you could say, is still kind of in the baby stages. There's not a lot, like a huge roster out there. And actually, Vixen, you did talk about that, and you were comparing with like how Genshin has a much bigger roster. So in our previous video where we talked about our Changli pre-release and talked about her kit, I did bring up Encore a lot because it does make sense. Because when you look at Changli's outro skill, she's giving fusion damage bonus as well as resonance liberation damage bonus. That sounds perfect for a character like Encore. The only issue, and once again I talked about this, was that Encore takes up a lot of field time after you use her liberation, and Changli kind of feels the same way, using a lot of those skills, getting her enflammement for her heavy attack. She is kind of, feeling like around 10 seconds of field time, give or take, and the same thing with Encore. So that's a lot of time. That's 20 seconds with just the 2 characters. Never mind your 3rd character. Even if they don't take up a lot of field time, more than 20 seconds is just, to me at least, seems like a pretty long rotation, especially when we get to talking about up times on different buffs you've got going, whether that's coming from certain weapons or just other characters' outros or other kits, what have you. So when you look at all of the 5 stars in Wuthering Waves, I mean, we have Jian, Yinlin, Jinxie, and now we're getting Changli. When you look at these 4 characters, they're really all focused on damage. The first character that would be erring more on the side of support was probably going to be Yinlin. But even then, we know she can have a little bit of her own field time and deal quite a bit of damage and be more quick swappy. So the thing is, as far as pull value, you could still wait on Changli until we're getting a 5-star that is more heavily dedicated to supporting, whether this is going to be a 5-star healer or a 5-star support that's giving a lot of damage to the entire team, or just another character. I think a character like that we still kind of quite haven't gotten yet, at least in a limited 5-star, is going to have a lot of value, and I would say pull for that character. And I think at the beginning of the game, we thought that's what Yinlin would be more of, and it turned out she was more of personal damage, which isn't bad. We're still lacking a character that's a dedicated support, and they're not so much about their personal damage. So at the end of the day, yeah, Changli's going to be great because she's the only limited fusion character that's going to, deal a lot of damage. So like I did mention, like Encore, if you have Encore, I think you can safely skip. And even if you don't have Encore, if you're still doing okay, even without a fusion damage dealer, I think you're doing okay. And I would save for a 5-star character that's going to come out in the future, whether that's 1.2, 1.3 onwards, really think about getting that limited 5-star healer, support, whatever. Because right now, all we have in a dedicated support, at least for 5 stars, is pretty much Verena. She's an amazing healer. She does give a universal buff on the outro, so that is a case where the outro is actually helping everyone and not just the next character. But when we get a limited version of that, I think that's something that's going to have incredibly high pull value. Now, does this pull away from Changli? I don't think it does. If you don't have Encore, I think it's perfectly fine to go for Changli, because that is filling a role on your account that you don't have, especially if you didn't build Chixia. Mortefi's a character you should have already built if you do have him, just because he works well with so many characters, giving the heavy attack damage bonus and just dealing damage from off field. That's going to be a great asset to your account. So I think when looking at Changli, she's a pretty valuable pull from the start, just because in the fusion department, if you don't have Encore, then yeah, Changli is going to be definitely adding something to your account, and that's just a lot of fusion damage.
Now going to the next question we have, which is what kinds of teams are you trying to build? Now when looking at this, we kind of have to figure out what in the roster we actually have that can actually be useful for her. Newer games like Wuthering Waves, like we're talking about right now, the new game like Zenless Zone Zero, even, necessarily what, Genshin and Star Rail did at the beginning of their games as well. There wasn't too much of a big roster, so teams weren't overflowing with an abundance of characters that you could just use and switch out. So when looking at someone like Changli, you kind of have to think, do you have the teams or the characters in the roster even to make it work? And are there even characters in the roster to make it work, or are you really focusing on something for the future? So looking at Changli and what she could use as other teammates, thankfully she does have some pretty good teammates that she can use. Just in general, when looking at her, you're probably going to want somebody to buff her personal damage. Usually with the 3-type character role, you're usually looking for one support and then a sustain user. And then if you have a support and a sustain kind of together, you can have another damage character to switch out with the main DPS character. But as Riff just talked about, Changli really likes to stay on field a lot, so quick swapping isn't really an amazing idea. It can be done, but personally it just seems that Changli, kind of like a character like Jian, likes to be on field as long as possible to do as much damage while they're on field. So looking at some teammates at who you're going to want to use, there are a few of them, and the first one we want to bring up is talking about Tao Chi, more Tefi, and some other characters as well. But first talking about Tao Chi, obviously considering she's going to be a great sustain unit and a support all in one, she does create a shield, which is going to be nice for sustain for the active character, who you're usually going to be switching over to after Tao Chi. You're going to be trying to switch over to Changli. So that's going to be extremely nice. So once again, her outro skill increases resonance skill damage for the next person that comes out on field. So obviously with Changli doing a lot of skill damage, that's going to be extremely good for her. But the problem is that you're thinking, okay, well, what if I want to have, Changli's heavy attack do more damage? Then you can use someone like Mortefi who could kind of help you there. Just keep in mind, as we've talked about in the past, you can't stack outro skills. So if you switch from Mortefi to Tao Chi to then Changli, you're only getting Tao Chi's buff to Changli, and Mortefi's buff is going to Tao Chi. So it doesn't really help to stack too many characters. That's why having the 3-character rotation and having, one extremely, healer support type character, for instance, Tao Chi in this instance, you're probably going to want, if you're using Tao Chi with Changli, another damage dealer, or, just someone like Yang Yang or something like that, or Sanhua, or Jansin, just some extra damage, or Yinlin to actually just help get more damage out for the full team. But if you're using someone like Mortefi, who it's more focused on like heavy attack damage and he can kind of help there, then you're going to want, also once again, one of these other characters. But if you're just using another support, let's say you have Jansin or you have Verena or something like that, who's giving them a buff as well, it really depends on, are you trying to get Verena's buff, who's like an all damage buff to a character, to Changli, or are you trying to make sure that Tao Chi is giving her buff? The third character or the first character in that slot rotation is probably just going to be there for heals. So you're usually using someone like Baija or Farina to make sure that Changli and Tao Chi or Changli and whoever are not going to die when you're actually in combat. So all I'm going to say is really keep in mind what you're doing. You really want one support character with most teams to then buff Changli, and then the other character is really just there for sustain.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I like how you had that format set up with Changli and Tao Chi, and then just kind of having another somewhat of a damaged character. One that came to my mind was Chixia, actually, because she's very bursty. She doesn't have a lot of field time, so it does give Changli the breathability to stay on field, and then Changli's giving Chixia a lot of resonance liberation damage and a lot of fusion damage as well. And then you're already, swapping back into Tao Chi and then Changli again. It feels quite comfy. That's something I personally would probably try out. So just want to throw that thought out there. The next question we look at is, do you need the weapons? And Vixen already talked about Blazing Brilliance earlier on, and I think he already summed it up pretty well, that especially with Wuthering Waves, with the game being new, it doesn't really make sense to pull a weapon for a different character or even a 4-star. Now you could, because like he said, a great stat stick for other sword users like Yang Yang or even Sanhua, but it just doesn't make sense, especially guys, if you're free to play or you're like just paying for the battle pass and the kind of the monthly blessing type thing. I just would stay away from this unless you're pulling it for Changli. Definitely pull Changli first and then think about the weapon. So it's going to be really great for Changli. I mean, you're getting the crit damage, the attack percent, all that resonance skill damage increase. It's going to be awesome for her. But as far as does she actually need it? I would go out as far to say as she actually doesn't. I think there's going to be a lot of 4-star options that you can do just fine with. And it, like I said, if you're free to play, that's going to be probably the better option for you, is just get a copy of Changli and you don't have to pull on the weapon and just save up your Asterites for a future character.
Now we're going to talk about weighing the dangers between looking at the no resonance chains as well as looking at resonance chains. Kind of what does the character look like at R0? Are they worth it? And then looking at an R1 versus an R2, the first resonance chains that you can get. So talking about Changli and her resonance chains, do you actually need them? The first 2 resonance chains are nice and helpful, but it's not really a character that needs them. I don't feel like they are so goated to an extent where it's kind of like, for instance, if we jump back to another game, Raiden really wanting her C2, Hu Tao even more wanting her C1, a character like who really wants Eidolons in Star Rail, someone like Acheron who does really, really good with the E2, other characters that, are almost like they just get to another level when they get some of those early constellations or Eidolons. Here, though, when looking at the resonance chains, it doesn't seem like these resonance chains are really necessary for these kits, which is extremely good for a lot of people that are playing the game right now for Wuthering Waves. It allows them to save and get more characters, and allows them to be a little bit more frugal with what they're doing, to be a little bit less spendy, which allows actually these characters to be extremely worth. Jin C, characters like Yinlin, all the characters that we've had basically are really, really good with 0 resonance change, just at R0. But in terms of whether or not, if you're like, well, I don't care, I really like Changli, I want to make Fusion extremely good on my account, and I want to get one of the early resonance chains. Do I have to be like Hu Tao, where I'm okay with just stopping at the first, the second copy of the character and getting that first, resonance chain, or Constellation, or Eidolon, or whatever? Or do I have to be like a character like Raiden, where it's like, yeah, the C1's good, but you kind of have to go for the C2? Looking at the character though, the first resonance chain states that for Changli, the resonance skill Tripartite Flames and Heavy Attack Flaming Sacrifice increase Changli's damage dealt by 10% and gives a resistance to interruption. That's extremely good in my personal opinion. I think if you're gonna have to go for resonance changes because you really want to, this is where you go. You kind of don't need to go for the R2, although it is nice and it's kind of like a nice help, and we'll talk about that in a second. I don't feel like it's actually extremely necessary to get. But looking at the R2, it states that Inflamement increases Changli's crit rate by 25% for 8 seconds. The thing is here is that Rift actually brought up a really good point when we were talking about this before we started recording. The thing with this is that all that's really going to do is allow you to go even more into crit damage on some of your pieces, looking at your echoes. So going into this doesn't really seem like it's extremely necessary. It just allows you to get a higher ceiling of damage, is kind of at least what we were talking about beforehand. And I totally agree with that, because all it's allowing you to do is go less into crit rate on your echoes and really go towards crit damage, which allows you to just hit an extremely high ceiling, especially because once you hit this Inflamement, especially because you're probably going to be starting out with your ultimate, and once you use your Resonance Liberation or your ultimate, then you have 8 seconds of this crit rate increase. So all your damage is increased basically at this point by, it can be increased if it's critting more often, which allows you to then go into crit damage, which is then once again increasing your ceiling or giving you more attack percent, whatever it may be doing. That's going to be extremely helpful for you. So the R2 is nice overall because it allows you to have a higher ceiling, but the R1, if you're really looking at really early resonance chains, I would say the R1 is just so good in and of itself because it increases all damage dealt by 10%, and you're doing that resonance skill and that heavy attack pretty often in her rotation, as well as that resistance to interruption we've seen with plenty of other games as well as other characters. Resistance to interruption is extremely useful, especially for the very fast-paced combat that we see in Wuthering Waves. We hope that this video could help you decide on whether this character or weapon coming up on the next banner are for you. As always, if you have any suggestions that may help other players, go ahead and let us know down in the comments. Make sure to like, subscribe, and check out our Discord as well. Thank you again for watching the video, and we'll see you in the next one.